Bonsoir, French students. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to our second video of the second week of Chapter 1, Chapitre 1. And so you remember last time we talked about les descriptions des gens, so descriptions of people. So that should look familiar to you right here. Then we began to talk at the end of that video about making comparisons. So you'll see with all of these sentences that are here on this last slide we looked at, they all have something in common, right? They all begin with this expression, je suis. And if you remember what that means from our previous videos, je suis means I am. So, je suis plus dynamique que mon meilleur ami. Je suis aussi sportif que mon meilleur ami. Je suis moins timide que mon meilleur ami. And all of those, I used the masculine form because that's what's there first. But I'll go through it again, point out the comparison forms that we see in each of these sentences, and this time we'll use the feminine form. So we see in each of these sentences that there's kind of a new expression. So, plus que. And of course, plus looks just like the word plus in English, so it means more. It's something you're already familiar with. So it's a word that kind of helps you understand. In the second sentence, we see aussi que. And all that means is the same as. And finally, in the last sentence, we see moins que. And to help you remember, moins looks a whole lot like minus. So just think of that as less than. So in the first sentence, je suis plus dynamique que ma meilleure amie. So now I'm using the feminine form, so I'm talking about my female best friend. In the second sentence, je suis aussi sportive que ma meilleure amie. So this time I'm using sportive to describe myself because I am female. And in the last sentence, I can say, je suis moins timide que ma meilleure amie. So I'm saying I'm less shy or less timid than my female best friend. So these are very useful expressions, and it is what we call, if we move to our next slide, le comparatif. And I'm sure you can guess what this means in English, the comparative. And we have exactly the same grammar term in English. We can use the comparative to describe ourselves too. You can say, I am more active than my best friend, or I am just as active as my best friend, or I'm less active than my best friend. So somebody who's learning English has to learn the same kind of forms. So we just happen to be learning them in French. Okay, so on this slide we see d'autres adjectifs, other adjectives, and the comparative. So we're still learning about the comparative and other adjectives that we can use to make those descriptions. Okay, so as we talked about last time, we learned about adjectives and how they agree in gender and number with the nouns they describe. In English, we don't have to worry about that. We can put an adjective and a noun together and they do not need to agree. That's just a feature of English. French is different. Spanish is like French. Italian is like French. Romanian is like French. All those related languages do the same thing. And different languages or different groups of similar languages have similar rules and similar patterns that they follow. So we see with all of these adjectives right here, and we're basically looking at this column right here. This column is kind of like your base form, and for some reason that just wants to keep on coloring blue on me, doesn't it? So we'll just point an arrow to it in that case. Okay, so this is sort of the simplest form that we'll begin with, and from there we make changes. So one is paresseux, which just means lazy. Canadien, Canadian. Sportif, sporty or athletic. Intellectuel, intellectual. And so we just make changes to that base form adjective depending on who or what we are describing. So if we're talking about maybe more than one, male or a group of mixed males and females, we would use the plural masculine form. So, paresseux, the pronunciation is the same. Canadien, the pronunciation is the same. Sportif, intellectuel, the spelling doesn't change. Okay, but what we do have to worry about in this case, we can add ourselves a text box here and add some examples. So I can say, il est sportif. I'm talking about one person. He is athletic. But if I want to talk about multiple people, I can say, ils sont sportifs. They are athletic. Okay, so notice that il est, is the form of être, the verb to be that goes with il. Sont is the form of être that goes with il, ils. So we're talking about a group of people. It could be all males or it could be a mix of male and female. So in this case, you see that when we use the adjective sportif, when I'm talking about that mixed group or group of all males, I need to add an S to the end to agree with the pronoun il. Okay, so one influences the other, right? Okay, now what if I wanted to talk about maybe one woman? So in that case, I'm going to say elle est sportive. So now the adjective agrees with her because she is female. If I want to talk about a group of females, elles sont sportives. So it really just depends on who you are talking about and the number of people you're talking about. So the adjectives change in form, whether it be masculine or feminine form or singular or plural form. Okay, so I can do the same thing with paresseux. Il est paresseux. He is lazy. Okay, I can say ils sont paresseux. It doesn't change. So that's an adjective that doesn't happen to change in form, even when it's plural. So they are lazy. Ils sont paresseux. Okay, she is lazy. Elle est paresseuse. So the pronunciation and the spelling of this one is going to change if I'm talking about one female person. Elles sont paresseuses. So in this case, I'm keeping that feminine form and I'm adding an S to the end to show that I'm talking about a plural group of female people or even animals. We could say elles sont paresseuses in that case too, if we knew all the animals were female. Okay, so you can do the same thing and substitute all these same adjectives. So I can say, for example, il est canadien, or ils sont canadiens. The only difference is the S here. Elle est canadienne. Elles sont canadiennes. Sounds the same, I'm just adding an S to it. So hopefully you get the idea. So we can use adjectives in these kinds of comparative statements. These sentences I wrote are not comparatives, they're just straight up descriptions of people. But we can use these adjectives to make comparisons too. If I wanted to say, for example, let's add another sentence here. Maybe je suis plus, let's say, paresseuse que ma meilleure amie. So I'm saying there that I am lazier than my best friend. I don't think that's true, but it's a good example of a comparative using plus que, more than. All right, let's move on to our next slide. So we see here other adjectives that we can use with the comparative. So we have an adjective like, or adjectives like bon, gros, gentil. And these just change in form if we're changing it from masculine to feminine. So bon becomes bonne, gros becomes grosse, and gentil becomes gentil, but the pronunciation is the same, only the spelling changes. So the one that really changes in pronunciation and spelling, both of those would be bon to bonne. And notice that the word bon is a perfect example of a nasal vowel sound. So when you pronounce that sound, you should feel some sound waves or kind of vocal vibrations traveling through your nose. Bon. And by contrast, bonne. Okay. And then some other adjectives that you see here would be beau, which means handsome, jumeau, which means twin, nouveau, which means new, and vieux, which means old. So they're irregular adjectives, but they all have kind of similar patterns. So beau in the singular becomes beau with an X on the end in the plural, but the pronunciation is the same. Jumeau becomes jumeau. Nouveau becomes nouveau, and vieux becomes vieux. There's no change in pronunciation, only the change in the form. So if I wanted to, again, add here a text box where I can write some sentences. So I could say, il est beau. He is handsome. But if I want to talk about more than one, I can say, ils sont beaux. So the pronunciation of the adjective doesn't change, but the spelling does, because now it goes with il, I-L-S, in the plural. Okay, if I wanted to say she is beautiful, it would be elle est belle. And if I want to talk about more than one female person, elles sont belles. So the adjectives don't change, but the spelling does. Okay? I could take another one of these as an example, and I could say la voiture. You may or may not know this word. Voiture is car. So la voiture est, and it happens to be a feminine noun, so I need to use a feminine adjective, right? So I can say la voiture est vieille. So the car is old, vieille. If I wanted to talk about more than one car, les voitures sont vieilles. Same pronunciation, but now I've added an S to have the agreement. Okay, let's think of a masculine noun. Le quartier, you're going to see this word coming up pretty soon in this chapter. Le quartier just basically means the neighborhood, like the quarter, and quarter can kind of mean neighborhood in French. Like you've heard of, what is it called? In New Orleans, there's a certain place, quartier, but I forget the name now. So it's a word commonly used for neighborhood in French. So le quartier est vieux. Okay, so the neighborhood is old. Maybe it's historic. And les quartiers sont vieux. The spelling doesn't even change. So these are like irregular adjectives. We have irregular words in English too. If you think about something like, this isn't an adjective, but if I said, I saw a sheep, or I saw 10 sheep, the word doesn't change, right? So we have certain words like this that are irregular in English too. It's a pretty common phenomenon in lots of languages. Okay. And finally, the last one that we're going to be looking at here, just to be sure it's the last, yes. The last one we'll look at with le comparative. It gives you kind of an overview of all the different forms of le comparatif and how you fit the adjectives into each one. So, plus, adjective, que. So, je suis plus grand que Lisa. Or je suis plus grande que Lisa. So you notice that the formula is plus, adjective, and que. And if the word that comes after que, the adjective that follows it, starts with a vowel, then you'll drop the E and use an apostrophe, just like a contraction like we would do in English. Okay, so je suis plus grande que Lisa. Et aussi que, as we talked about before, means the same as. So, je suis aussi mince que Lisa. I am just as thin as Lisa. Okay, and if you think of this word mince, it's kind of like to mince in English. If you think about cooking, like mincing garlic, you're cutting it into smaller pieces, like to thin slices. So you can kind of make that association in your mind that mince means thin. Okay, moi que. Moi plus adjective plus que, of course, means less than. Je suis moins sportive que Lisa. Okay, so instead of using, and here's a kind of something important to know when you're talking about the adjective good, which is bon, instead of using plus que, you wouldn't say je suis plus bonne que. It doesn't work that way in French. You would use meilleur que to say better than. So let's add another couple of sentences here. I'll put them in red to make them stand out. I can say je suis meilleur. Oops. Yeah, it gave me the euro symbol there. Que Lisa. Or je suis meilleur en anglais. So maybe we're both studying English and I feel like I'm better than her. Je suis meilleur en anglais que Lisa. So we're both studying English and I'm just much better than she is. I put the E in parentheses there because it depends on who's speaking. I happen to be female, so I would keep the E there, but if you are male, you would drop the E and you can pronounce it in exactly the same way. Okay, the other form that you see there, you'll see both plus mauvais or mauvaise que or pire que, to say worse than. Okay, so I might say je suis plus mauvais or mauvaise en anglais que Lisa. So I am worse in English than Lisa. So, I need to study some more. So I gotta pay attention to that. Or I can say, je suis pire en anglais que Lisa. So in that case, I'm not even using pire que. And just, je suis pire en anglais que Lisa. Okay, so basically these are kind of irregular ways of saying that you're better at something than somebody else or you're worse at something than somebody else. Okay, so I think this gives you a pretty good summary of how le comparatif works, how you can use adjectives to make descriptions of yourself, of other people, to compare yourself to other people using descriptive words. And I hope that helps you master the concept. The next video we'll be talking all about questions. So have a great night. Bonne nuit.